Quite a few years ago, I and a colleague in Bridgeport attended a weekend workshop in New York City, and hoping we might meet some celebrities, we went to a famous restaurant. I'm wondering if they're still there, Mama Leone's?
Oh yeah.
Is it still there? Really is. There's some marvelous sculptures in there, and it was very an artistic place to be. And as I recall, there were finger bowls, which I didn't know anything about, where you wash your fingers after you get them all messed up to eating your dinner. Anyway, it's really that fancy. It was a very fancy and expensive place to go. But I went with a group of friends from seminary that had not graduated yet. I had been out of seminary for a while. We didn't see any celebrities, but an unusual thing did happen. Because in the middle of our meal, the waiter walked up to me and said, "Excuse me, you have a call." I said, "That can't be. Nobody even knows I'm here. So how can that be possible?" But he said, "You have a call." So I went over to the phone and I answered the phone. Said, "Dr. Bloom, you are needed at Bellevue Hospital in surgery." And I said, "Oh, everything. I am not Dr. Bloom." And that was interesting. I went to the desk and had this experience. They did say that they hated to interrupt me. Well, this call was for someone else, not for me. I must have looked like Dr. Bloom, because the waiter really thought he had the right person, and he apologized, and we still gave him a good tip at the end of the meal. That's very funny.
So you were someone famous.
Yeah, that's right.
Actually, you were someone famous.
Anyway, many people come armed with a formidable array of communication devices today, including home phones, voicemail, answering machines, cell phones, car phones, internet phones, tablets, and saxophones. Okay, I'm just fooling about the saxophones. More and more often we find ourselves in conversation with someone when suddenly music starts playing in their pocketbook or in their pocket, and out comes the cell phone. Moments later, someone has a call, and the assumption is that I need to answer it right now. Interrupts our conversation many times, even though we teach our kids not to interrupt. How many times do we stop and the phone rings in our pocket and interrupt what's going on? Okay, the words of Matthew 4 tell the story of Jesus walking into the busyness of 4 fishermen, 2 pairs of brothers, who were very busy at work, and saying, "Excuse me, but you have a call, and I need you to respond to it." He gave them an invitation to follow him. In their case, the call was to shift their lives away from what they were doing, to devote themselves instead to a new way of serving God by following Jesus, to shift their lives in new directions, to choose to let their lives be shaped by the teachings, the example of Jesus himself. Do you believe that God has ever called you to do something? Have you ever had the experience of sensing God trying to get through to you in the midst of your busyness? Trying to get your attention away from other things, maybe even keeping you awake at night. Well, saying, "Excuse me, but you have a call and I need you to respond." Some, no doubt, know the familiar hymn, "Jesus Calls Us," over the tumult of life's wild and restless sea. Day by day his sweet voice sound is saying, "Christian, follow me." We know that, many of us. If you and I have a call from God to do something, how are we going to hear it above all of the noise in our lives? In the midst of our daily busyness and sense of responsibilities that take us elsewhere, over all of the advertisements that bombard us all day long, indeed, as the hymn says, over the tumult of life's wild and restless sea. From the book of 1 Samuel, we heard about The old story of the priest Eli sleeping in the temple and Samuel sleeping in another room, and yet hearing a voice saying, "Samuel, Samuel," so he runs to Eli thinking Eli is calling him. And Eli, after 3 times of putting up with this or hearing Samuel come with this request, "Why are you calling me?" Eli says, "I'm not calling you, go back to bed." And the next time you hear something like that, stop and say, "Speak, Lord, for your servant is listening." Aha, there it is. The key is listening. Something that many of us often do not do very well. Not really, even when we think we are. Remember the question 30 seconds ago was, if God calls us to do something, how are we ever going to hear it amidst all of the noise in our lives, in the midst of our busyness, over all of the advertisements and other distractions that bombard us all day, indeed the tumult of life's wild and restless sea? The answer is we need to learn. That's as important as the word listen. We need to learn to listen better to the right things. In a former church, we had a handbell choir of 14 people. It was out on Cape Cod where we were for 10 years. And it was amazing. Our handbell choir director was able to keep track of the 14 bells ringing all at the same time, which to me would boggle most people's sense of coordination. And some were holding 4 bells in each hand, 2 small ones in each hand at different angles, so you could, depending on which way you went like this, it would ring certain bells. I bet Ann knows about that because she plays in a handbell choir in United Methodist Church in West Haven once a month. Our handbell choir director was amazing. We could be ringing all of those bells and she would immediately hear a mistake and point to the bell where the mistake had been made. It was sometimes me. Because I didn't attend all the rehearsals, I must confess. She had the amazing ability to listen and to hear what was wrong in the midst of all the other sounds. But more importantly, she could hear what was right in the midst of all of that cacophony. Listening to God's call in one's life is in part the art of listening and hearing accurately what is right in the midst of all the other things going on in our lives. Another word for that we use in the church is discernment, looking for the most important things in the midst of all the others. People through the centuries have heard the call of God upon their lives in different ways and in different places and circumstances. But one thing they have in common is that they were learning or did learn to listen for the right things in the midst of all of the others. I think we're all familiar with how careful and accurate listening frequently breaks down between people in friendships and relationships, and parents and children and parents, and church people, and between colleagues where we work, and almost everywhere we find ourselves. There must be a deep need for communication because we have a web of communication that circles the globe now. Yet we don't seem to be able to communicate with the person next to us accurately all the time. Anyway, how often problems between people are found to be the results of faulty communication. We often point it out after the problem has occurred. If God were trying to get through to you to say, "Excuse me, you have a call, and I need you to respond," how would you know? I'd like to suggest one way to think about it, and one common mistake we make is to expect a lot less of our religious life without putting enough, rather expecting a lot in our religious life without putting a lot of effort into it. Well, you know, why pick on that? In most other areas of our life where we want to know something and do something and be accurate about it, we spend time preparing for it. We know we will not understand great music if we do not have any sense of what goes into appreciating great music. We know we must study great literature if we want to gain a deeper understanding of it. We wouldn't dream of practicing medicine without studying anatomy and pathology. Now, Barbara is a doctor in our congregation who's down there working with our children, but in case you're listening, Barbara, we recognize that you had to do a lot of preparation in order to understand our physical as well as emotional needs. We would not build a major bridge without being trained in engineering. Likewise, we're much more likely to be attuned to God's call upon our lives if we learn and develop in ourselves the kind of spiritual listening and awareness that separates out God's voice from all of the rest. Years ago, Isaac Newton's mind was prepared to notice things that others had passed right by and not really given much thought. I don't know if it was really an apple that dropped from a tree, but it's a good way to begin the conversation that he must have noticed something like that falling to the ground. Suddenly, with a mind that was prepared to see beyond the ordinary to that which was extraordinary, Newton was not only able to describe the gravitational forces between an apple and the ground, or the earth and the moon, and the earth and the sun, but also the gravitational fields that exist beyond, between masses throughout the universe. Just because he noticed something that looked ordinary to everybody else here on planet Earth and realized the implications, saw there was something extraordinary going on in the ordinary. To develop eyes that see and ears that hear, and a sensitivity to those things is a real gift. But you have to work at it to develop it, to put a lot of energy into the spiritual life, to develop that kind of sensitivity. Many of life's occurrences seem commonplace until we become prepared to see the ordinary is filled with the extraordinary. Regular personal discipline is one way to approach it. There are books about spiritual disciplines that we are encouraged to practice. Sometimes those are the last things that we have time for, we think, in a busy day. A prayer life, worship alone, and especially worship together, where we share our faith and our insights with one another. Discussion and study of the Bible, personal journaling about the meaning of each day, many other spiritual exercises that greatly enhance our ability to pay attention to and to listen to and to hear the right and the powerful things of God in the midst of everything else that's happening to fill our day. I believe that absolutely everybody has a call from God. Everybody here has a call from God. By the fact that we exist and we're alive, God gives a purpose to life. Everyone has a call from God. It's often closely related to the gifts and abilities you have, including the ones you don't see, that perhaps somebody else sees and affirms and causes you to say, oh, maybe I could do that. Discovery, self-discovery, with the help of others around us, noticing. The very fact you're a gifted person implies to me God is saying to you and to me, right now, right today, excuse me, you have a call, and I need you to respond. Let us pray. Dear Lord, as we continue our journey, considering our relationships with you and with one another and the world around us, increase our listening ability and our understanding and perception for discerning your call upon each one of us, and including ourselves. May we affirm the gifts we see in others around us and remember to tell them, as well as discovering we can use our own to fulfill your will by loving and serving our neighbors. In Christ's name, amen.